Behind the glitz and glamour of classic Hollywood lurked a smoky secret. While America waged war on marijuana, Tinseltown's brightest stars were lighting up between takes. Did you know one legendary director filmed an entire Western while completely high? These aren't just celebrities who occasionally indulged. These are the notorious cannabis fiends whose habits shocked even Hollywood insiders. Number 1. Robert Mitchum. The quintessential tough guy with the sleepy eyes wasn't just acting relaxed. Mitchum's infamous 1948 marijuana arrest blew the lid off Hollywood's hush-hush cannabis culture. While filming Rachel and the Stranger, police raided a small Hollywood Hills party, discovering Mitchum and starlet Lila Leeds passing a joint. The headlines were explosive. Movie Bad Man Caught with Marijuana. The fallout was unprecedented. Mitchum was sentenced to 60 days in county jail, with newspapers declaring his career over. "This is the bitter end of everything," Mitchum told reporters. But RKO studio boss Howard Hughes had other plans. Instead of dropping their star, Hughes orchestrated a publicity campaign painting Mitchum as a repentant sinner seeking redemption. Behind the scenes, Mitchum remained defiant. When asked about the experience years later, he casually quipped, "It was just like Palm Springs, only the food was worse." The arrest did nothing to diminish his appetite for marijuana. Crew members from later films reported Mitchum regularly disappeared between takes for cigarette breaks that left his eyes noticeably redder. Most shocking of all, the scandal actually boosted Mitchum's box office appeal. His dangerous reputation made him irresistible to audiences. As director Otto Preminger later admitted, Robert didn't need to act like a bad boy. He was one, and audiences could sense it. In one of Hollywood's great ironies, the arrest that should have destroyed him only cemented his legend as cinema's ultimate rebel. Number 2. Louis Armstrong. The jazz virtuoso who revolutionized American music wasn't just blowing his trumpet. Armstrong was one of Hollywood's most dedicated marijuana enthusiasts, smoking what he lovingly called gauge daily for over 3 decades. While filming high-profile movie appearances and recording soundtracks, Armstrong was rarely without his cannabis. Few fans realized that when Armstrong appeared in films like High Society and Hello, Dolly, he was often completely stoned. He carried marijuana in cigarette boxes labeled Satchmo's private stock, and was so devoted to the herb that he wrote President Eisenhower demanding legalization. Armstrong once spent 9 days in a Las Vegas jail for possession, an incident the studios paid a fortune to keep quiet. The most astonishing aspect of Armstrong's habit was his militancy about it. In his autobiography, he defiantly proclaimed, "It really puzzles me to see marijuana connected with narcotics. My friends certainly are in my corner because they know we're not dope addicts." He credited marijuana with keeping him creative and calm throughout his tumultuous career in Hollywood's segregated studio system. When warned about potential damage to his lungs, Armstrong scoffed, "We always looked at pot as a sort of medicine. It makes you feel good, man." Even more remarkably, Armstrong introduced countless Hollywood elites to marijuana during private parties at his home, creating a secret network of cannabis users throughout the industry. One unnamed studio executive later confessed, "If the public knew how many films of the 40 seconds and 50 seconds were conceived while everyone was smoking Satchmo's gauge, they'd watch classic Hollywood with entirely different eyes." Number 3. Tallulah Bankhead. The stage and screen siren whose provocative personality dominated 1930 Hollywood harbored a cannabis habit that was legendary even in a town full of secret users. Bankhead wasn't just an occasional smoker, she was a flamboyant cannabis enthusiast who once declared, "Marijuana is the most fun you can have for $1. Studio executives lived in terror of Bankhead's cannabis-fueled antics. During the filming of Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat, she regularly showed up to set high, resulting in multiple reshot scenes and budget overruns. Hitchcock, known for his controlling directorial style, was reportedly furious but powerless against the star's behavior. When confronted about her glazed expression in rushes, Bankhead merely laughed and said, "Darling, the character is stranded at sea. Did you expect her to look fresh as a daisy?" The wildest stories came from Bankhead's infamous Hollywood parties, where she served marijuana-laced brownies to unsuspecting guests. Actor John Emery recalled, "You'd arrive sober and leave feeling like you'd traveled to another dimension." Only later did we realize Tallulah had enhanced the desserts. These cannabis soirees became so notorious that invitations to her home were both coveted and feared. Despite multiple warnings from studios, Bankhead refused to curb her cannabis consumption. When Paramount threatened to terminate her contract over her marijuana use, she reportedly responded, "I'll give up men before I give up marijuana." This defiance limited her film roles, as studios increasingly viewed her as unreliable. Yet, her cult status grew precisely because of her unapologetic lifestyle, making her an underground hero to Hollywood's closeted cannabis community and a lasting icon of rebellion against studio control. Number 4. Peter Lorie. The master of cinematic creepiness brought an unsettling edge to classics like Casablanca and M. But few realized his unnerving stare had chemical assistance. Behind those bulging eyes lurked Hollywood's most unexpected cannabis enthusiast. Lorie's marijuana habit began as pain management for his chronic gallbladder condition, but quickly evolved into a daily ritual that shaped his legendary performances. Warner Brothers executives were stunned when they discovered Lorie smoking joints in his dressing room before filming pivotal scenes in The Maltese Falcon. Director John Huston, rather than reporting the actor, simply incorporated Lorie's cannabis-induced mannerisms into the character. Huston later confided to friends, "Peter wasn't just acting strange, he was genuinely altered, and it created something the camera absolutely loved." The most shocking aspect of Lorie's cannabis use was how it influenced his iconic acting style. His distinctive slow delivery, pregnant pauses, and sudden bursts of manic energy weren't just artistic choices. They were the direct result of marijuana's effect on his timing and perception. Fellow actor Vincent Price once remarked, "Peter had this remarkable ability to seem simultaneously lethargic and intensely focused. Only later did I realize this wasn't technique, but cannabis." By the 1950s, Lorie's dependency had become so pronounced that directors would schedule his scenes according to when he'd be appropriately medicated. One unnamed director admitted, "There was a sweet spot with Peter. Too little marijuana, and he was agitated and rushed. Too much, and he'd forget his lines entirely." We learned to time his consumption like a science. Despite multiple studio interventions, Lorie maintained his cannabis habit until his death, creating one of Hollywood's strangest open secrets, and forever linking his uncanny performances with his equally unusual stimulant of choice. Number 5. Veronica Lake. The blonde bombshell whose peek-a-boo hairstyle launched 1,000 imitations was hiding more than just one eye. Lake's spectacular fall from Hollywood royalty to obscurity was fueled by a marijuana habit that studio executives spent fortunes trying to conceal. At the height of her fame, Lake couldn't get through a day of filming without multiple marijuana breaks. The problems began during the filming of Sullivan's Travels, when director Preston Sturges noticed Lake's erratic behavior and dilated pupils. Rather than reporting her, Sturges reworked scenes to accommodate her state, later telling colleagues, "Veronica had two personalities. Before lunch, she was professional. After her cigarette break, she became wildly unpredictable but magically luminous on camera." Paramount's solution was both clever and problematic. They assigned Lake a companion, who was actually tasked with regulating her cannabis consumption. Just enough to keep her anxiety at bay, but not so much that she couldn't function. This precarious balance collapsed during the filming of The Hour Before Dawn, when Lake appeared so obviously intoxicated that entire sequences had to be reshot, costing the studio thousands. By 1948, Lake's cannabis use had combined with alcohol to create behavior so erratic that no amount of studio protection could salvage her career. The actress, who had once commanded $4,500 per week, found herself virtually unemployable. When asked years later about her spectacular downfall, Lake offered a rare moment of clarity. "The camera sees everything, including what you're trying to hide. I wasn't just hiding behind my hair. I was hiding behind a cloud of smoke that eventually consumed me." Her cautionary tale became secret Hollywood lore, whispered as warning to young starlets tempted by cannabis's false promise of creative enhancement. Number 6. Jack Kerouac. Before he became the voice of the Beat generation, Kerouac tried his hand at Hollywood, working briefly as a script doctor while developing what would become On the Road. His marijuana consumption during this period wasn't just recreational, it was practically professional. Kerouac believed cannabis was essential to his creative process, smoking constantly while revising studio scripts into what executives called incomprehensible jazz on paper. Studio head Louis B. Mayer personally fired Kerouac after finding him smoking on the MGM lot. According to witnesses, Kerouac didn't even stand up from his cross-legged position on the ground, merely offering Mayer a hit from his joint. Mayer reportedly turned purple with rage, shouting, "Get this beatnik degenerate off my studio, or I'll have him arrested." The confrontation became underground Hollywood legend. What few people realize is that Kerouac's brief, disastrous Hollywood period directly influenced his writing style. The spontaneous prose he later became famous for was developed while high, writing alternative scenes for formulaic studio pictures. As Kerouac later explained to fellow writer Allen Ginsberg, "Hollywood taught me what not to do. Every restriction they put on storytelling, I broke while smoking grass in my studio apartment." The most shocking revelation came decades later, when an anonymous producer admitted that one of MGM's biggest 1950 hits contained an entire sequence written by Kerouac during a marijuana-fueled all-nighter. "We couldn't credit him because of the circumstances, but there's a 5-minute scene in a classic MGM musical that pure Kerouac written while he was completely stoned. Film scholars have never caught it." This secret cannabis-created contribution to mainstream Hollywood remains cinema's greatest hidden literary connection. Number 7. Billie Holiday. The jazz legend, whose haunting voice graced numerous Hollywood soundtracks, battled demons far worse than marijuana, but cannabis played a complex role in her tumultuous relationship with Tinseltown. Holiday used marijuana throughout her career to manage her nerves before recording sessions for major studio films, developing a tolerance that astonished even experienced users. During the scoring of a major 1947 film, Holiday shocked orchestra members by smoking 3 marijuana cigarettes in quick succession before nailing her vocal in a single take. The sound engineer later remarked, "Any other singer would have been unconscious after that much grass." Billie just closed her eyes and delivered the most haunting performance I've ever recorded. This supernatural tolerance became part of her mystique. What makes Holiday's story particularly tragic is how federal authorities weaponized her cannabis use. Federal Bureau of Narcotics Commissioner Harry Anslinger personally targeted Holiday, using her marijuana habit as pretext to harass and eventually destroy her. When Holiday was contracted for a major studio film appearance in 1949, Anslinger threatened the producers with negative publicity, effectively blacklisting her from Hollywood. Perhaps most disturbing was Hollywood's complicity in Holiday's persecution. Studio heads who themselves attended cannabis-friendly parties refused to defend Holiday, finding it easier to cut ties than challenge federal authorities. One producer, speaking anonymously years later, admitted, "We all knew the marijuana charges were just an excuse to target her. Half the white stars in Hollywood were smoking the same stuff at the same parties we attended. but we stood by silently while Billie was sacrificed. This double standard highlights how cannabis use, tolerated in white stars, became career-ending for Holiday, revealing Hollywood's darkest hypocrisies. Number 8. Dennis Hopper. The rebel who revolutionized American cinema with Easy Rider built his early career on a foundation of constant cannabis consumption. Long before directing his counterculture masterpiece, Hopper was known throughout 1950 Hollywood as an actor who was perpetually stoned, challenging the buttoned-up studio system with every puff. During the filming of Giant, director George Stevens became so frustrated with Hopper's marijuana-induced behavior that he banished him from the set between scenes. James Dean, himself no stranger to substances, reportedly told Stevens, "Dennis isn't difficult. He's just on a different planet most of the time." This reputation made Hopper virtually unemployable for years, forcing him to seek work in Europe where attitudes toward cannabis were less puritanical. The turning point came when Hopper realized he could channel his cannabis experiences into art. Easy Rider wasn't just a film that depicted marijuana use. It was conceived, written, and directed under its influence. Hopper later admitted, "We were all stoned all the time. The editing room reeked so badly of marijuana that the studio executives wouldn't even enter to check on our progress." This creative freedom produced a film that changed American cinema forever. Perhaps the most ironic chapter in Hopper's cannabis saga was the studio's reaction to Easy Rider's success. The same executives who had blacklisted him for his marijuana use now celebrated him as a visionary, conveniently overlooking that his vision came directly from the substance they had condemned. As Hopper sarcastically noted in a 1970 interview, "Suddenly, my drug problem became my unique artistic perspective. Nothing had changed except the money I was making for them." Hopper's journey from cannabis outcast to counterculture prophet revealed Hollywood's elastic morality, where principles always bent toward profit. Number 9. John Huston. The legendary director behind The Maltese Falcon and The African Queen wasn't just commanding actors. He was commanding impressive amounts of marijuana throughout his illustrious career. Unlike actors who could be controlled, Huston's position as a top director allowed him to indulge his cannabis habit with near impunity, creating a bubble of tolerance around his productions. Humphrey Bogart once remarked that working on a Huston film meant learning to communicate with a man whose mind was operating on a completely different wavelength after lunch. This wasn't metaphorical. Huston maintained a strict routine of smoking marijuana during his midday break, returning to set with what he called his enhanced perspective. Studio executives looked the other way because his films consistently made money. The filming of The Treasure of the Sierra Madre produced the most outrageous examples of Huston's cannabis-influenced directing. Deep in the Mexican mountains, beyond studio oversight, Huston reportedly directed entire sequences while smoking openly. Actor Walter Huston, John's father, initially objected, but eventually joined his son, creating what crew members described as the most relaxed set in Mexico, with father and son giggling between takes like schoolboys. Most shocking were Huston's marijuana-fueled rewrites. Screenwriter Truman Capote revealed years later that during their collaboration, John would smoke a joint, stare at the pages for an uncomfortably long time, then suddenly cross out entire scenes and rewrite them on the spot. The frustrating part was that his stoned revisions were often brilliant. End quote. This pattern continued throughout Huston's career, raising the tantalizing question of how many classic Hollywood moments were born directly from cannabis-induced creativity that studios simultaneously condemned and profited from. Number 10. Tuesday Weld. The stunning actress, whose performances in The Cincinnati Kid and Lord Love a Duck captivated audiences, carried a shocking secret through her early career. By age 16, Weld was already Hollywood's most functional underage cannabis user, developing a pattern that would follow her for decades. Studio executives, eager to profit from her talent and beauty, constructed an elaborate system to manage, rather than stop her marijuana use. During the filming of Rally Round the Flag, Boys, director Leo McCarey discovered Weld smoking marijuana with crew members. Instead of reporting her, McCarey instituted what became known as the Tuesday Protocol, scheduling her most demanding scenes for early morning before she'd had a chance to smoke, and saving her reaction shots for later in the day when she was, as one crew member delicately put it, in an altered state of consciousness. This pattern continued throughout her early career, with directors developing techniques to work around her cannabis habit. Joan Crawford, after working with Weld, commented, "That girl lives in a perpetual fog, but somehow it works for her on camera. She has a dreamy quality you can't teach." This backhanded compliment reflected the industry's grudging accommodation of Weld's functioning marijuana use. The most disturbing aspect was how studios exploited her cannabis-enhanced vulnerability. One director admitted years later, "Tuesday High was Tuesday authentic. We knew exactly when to push for emotional scenes because the marijuana stripped away her defenses." This manipulation raises troubling questions about consent and exploitation in an era before performers had meaningful protections. Despite these challenges, Weld delivered performances of startling depth, leading critics to wonder whether her cannabis use was hindrance or dark creative catalyst in a system already built on exploitation. Number 11. Harry Anita. The pioneering Mexican-American star who broke barriers in 1940 Hollywood had a complicated relationship with cannabis that reflected the era's cultural hypocrisy. While American actors caught with marijuana faced scandal, Anita initially received studio protection because executives believed her use reflected exotic cultural practices they could market to audiences fascinated by perceived Latin temperament. This problematic double standard created a bizarre situation where Anita smoked marijuana openly at studio functions, with publicists spinning her behavior as authentic Mexican artistic tradition. When she attempted to correct these racist stereotypes by explaining that her cannabis use was personal, not cultural, studio heads threatened to terminate her contract. As she later wrote in her unpublished memoir, "They didn't want me as I was. They wanted their exotic creation, who confirmed their prejudices." The situation deteriorated during filming of The Bullfighter and The Lady, when director Bud Betticher complained that Anita was too relaxed for key, dramatic scenes. The studio's solution was both practical and disturbing. They simply confiscated her marijuana before emotional scenes and returned it afterward as reward. This manipulation of her dependency created the performance dynamics audiences praised, without knowing the exploitative conditions behind them. The ultimate irony came when changing cultural attitudes made Anita's once protected cannabis use a liability. The same studio that had incorporated her marijuana habit into her exotic image abruptly dropped her contract during the conservative backlash of the early 1950s. A studio memo uncovered years later coldly stated, "Her off-screen habits, once marketable, now represent unacceptable moral risk." This betrayal left Anita struggling in an industry that had exploited, then abandoned her, revealing Hollywood's opportunistic relationship with both cannabis and cultural difference. Boy genius who revolutionized cinema with Citizen Kane had a cannabis habit as outsized as his talent and ego. Welles didn't just enjoy marijuana, he elevated it to an essential component of his creative process, smoking constantly while editing his masterpieces. This habit, combined with his revolutionary filmmaking approach, made him the terror of conventional studio executives. During post-production on The Magnificent Ambersons, Welles locked himself in the editing room for 72 straight hours, sustained by what his assistant called a constant fog of marijuana smoke so thick you could barely see the screen. When RKO executives finally broke down the door, they found Welles asleep on the floor, surrounded by brilliant edits and burnt roaches. This incident contributed to the studio's decision to seize and re-edit the film, creating one of cinema's greatest tragedies. Welles made no attempt to hide his cannabis use, once telling a shocked reporter, "Marijuana helps me see beyond conventional structures. Hollywood thinks in straight lines. I think in spirals and curves." This philosophical approach to cannabis extended to his notorious radio broadcast of War of the Worlds. Performer Howard Koch later revealed, Orson had smoked before going on air. That dreamlike quality in his voice that terrified America came directly from the marijuana. The saddest chapter in Welles's cannabis saga was how it contributed to his industry exile. In a town that tolerated closeted marijuana use, Welles's refusal to be hypocritical became another strike against him. Studio head Jack Warner once declared, "Welles has two problems. He won't follow orders, and he won't hide his vices." This combination made him unbankable despite his genius. As Welles bitterly noted in his final years, Hollywood forgives everything except honesty about the tools that fuel its creativity. His career became cannabis's most significant artistic casualty. Number 13. Debbie Reynolds. America's sweetheart harbored a secret that would have shattered her wholesome image. The star of Singin' in the Rain and the unsinkable Molly Brown discovered marijuana during the filming of How the West Was Won, and developed a carefully concealed habit that lasted for years. What makes Reynolds' case fascinating was the elaborate performance she maintained both on and off screen. Unlike many stars who smoked openly among Hollywood insiders, Reynolds maintained absolute secrecy, smoking alone and developing techniques to mask any evidence. Her motivation wasn't just career preservation, but genuine concern for her young fans. As she confided to a close friend, "My public is children and their parents. I won't betray their trust by getting caught, but I won't betray myself by giving up something that helps me cope with this pressure." Cooker. The closest Reynolds came to exposure was during rehearsals for The Singing Nun. When director Henry Koster noticed her unusually relaxed state, suspecting cannabis, he confronted her privately. Instead of denying it, Reynolds reportedly made a deal. "What you suspect stays between us, and I'll deliver the performance of my career." Impressed by her frankness, Koster kept her secret, later calling her the most functional marijuana user I've ever encountered in this town of excess. Perhaps most remarkable was Reynolds' discipline. Unlike peers whose habits escalated, she maintained rigid boundaries, smoking only after completing professional obligations and never before caring for her children. This moderation allowed her to preserve both her career and her cannabis use for decades. As her daughter, Carrie Fisher, later wrote with ironic admiration, "Mom was better at hiding her vices than anyone in Hollywood. She didn't just have a public face and private face, she had separate lives that never intersected, each perfect in its own way." This disciplined duality made Reynolds the most successful secret stoner of her generation. Number 14. Richard Burton. The magnificent Welsh actor whose commanding presence electrified Cleopatra and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, maintained a cannabis habit throughout his Hollywood years that was overshadowed by his more obvious battle with alcohol. While the press focused on his drinking, insiders knew Burton was a sophisticated cannabis enthusiast who believed marijuana enhanced his already formidable linguistic abilities. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz first noticed Burton's pattern during Cleopatra, observing that the actor's famously mellifluous voice developed new dimensions after his private tea breaks. Rather than confronting him, Mankiewicz began scheduling Burton's most poetic monologues after these breaks, creating a strange creative partnership with the actor's habit. The director later confided, "To colleagues, Richard's voice is extraordinary natural, but when he's smoked, it takes on an almost supernatural quality. I found myself giving him more and more dialogue." Burton's cannabis use became more pronounced during his tumultuous relationship with Elizabeth Taylor. Surprisingly, it was Taylor who introduced Burton to higher-quality marijuana during their time in Mexico. Burton wrote in his diary, later published to much controversy, "E brought me what she calls the good stuff today. After trying it, I delivered my lines with such musical precision that the sound man applauded. There might be something to this Mexican tobacco after all." The tragic dimension of Burton's cannabis habit was how it intersected with his alcoholism. Burton used marijuana in a misguided attempt to moderate his drinking, creating a complex dependency cycle. As colleague and friend Peter O'Toole observed, Richard smoked to soften the hard edges of his drinking, then drank to celebrate how marvelous he felt while smoking. It was a circular firing squad of substances. This destructive pattern contributed to Burton's declining health and premature aging, turning the once magnificent actor into a cautionary tale about multiple dependencies, even as his cannabis use remained largely hidden from public view. Number 15. Ava Gardner. The breathtaking star, whose beauty and talent illuminated The Killers and Mogambo, wasn't just smoking cigarettes in those iconic film noir scenes. Gardner maintained a steady cannabis habit throughout her MGM years, developing a remarkable tolerance that allowed her to function at levels that astonished colleagues unfamiliar with marijuana's effects. Gardner discovered cannabis while filming The Night of the Iguana in Mexico, where director John Huston, himself a regular user, introduced her to local varieties. What began as curiosity quickly became routine, with Gardner incorporating marijuana into her preparation process. Co-star Richard Burton noted in his diary, "Ava disappears before emotional scenes and returns with eyes slightly reddened, but performance capacity mysteriously enhanced. Whatever her method, it produces results that are undeniable." MGM executives suspected Gardner's habit, but chose strategic ignorance because her work remained impeccable. This hands-off approach changed dramatically when a photographer captured images of Gardner smoking what was clearly not a tobacco cigarette at a private beach. The studio's fixers paid $75,000 for the negatives, an astronomical sum in 1950 money, demonstrating just how devastating they considered such exposure. The most poignant aspect of Gardner's cannabis use was her own clear-eyed assessment of its role in her life. In letters to close friend Howard Hughes, she wrote, "The grass helps me tolerate the endless waiting on set, the endless male gazes, the endless pressure to be something I'm not. Is it weakness to need this buffer between myself and what they demand of me? Perhaps. But I'd rather be a functioning hypocrite than a broken purist." This pragmatic approach allowed Gardner to navigate Hollywood's demands while maintaining her sense of self, making her cannabis use less self-destruction than strategic survival in a system designed to consume rather than sustain its brightest stars. We've pulled back the curtain on Hollywood's smoky past, revealing the stars who created cinema history while secretly stoned. But here's the question that should keep you thinking. Was marijuana really these legends' downfall, or was it Hollywood's hypocrisy that did the real damage? The studios built empires on the creativity of cannabis users while publicly condemning them. Hit subscribe if you want to see more hidden Hollywood histories, and tell us in the comments, which star's secret stoner story surprised you most?